This video was a request from my one and only Patreon supporter Rob, who I am 100% was cursed by an evil witch, because I have never had more technical difficulties working on a video than this one. Everybody make sure to thank Rob in the comments and tell him how big and handsome he is. And if you too would like to bend me over a barrel and make me call you daddy, you can always visit my Patreon. Every dollar is appreciated, and every dollar goes to new equipment. With that out of the way, let's get started. Lukas the Trickster is the oldest living blood claw of the Spacewolves. He exists in the tabletop game, unlike Hanzo, and he is by far one of the funniest and most interesting Space Marines I've ever read about. He tends to fight with a plasma pistol in one hand and a wolf claw in the other. A wolf claw is basically a lightning claw that has cryonic power instead of lightning, and he wears the pelt of a doppelganger on his back, which obfuscates his movement and can make him partially invisible. And even he doesn't understand how it works. For those of you who don't know, Bloodclaw is the lowest rank of Spacewolf. They struggle with their ability to harness their killing rage, so much so that they are sometimes known to just disobey orders and charge straight into enemy lines, obsessed with the idea of gaining glory and honor. And as Lukas points out, the chapter has become so flanderized that they're losing Bloodclaws faster than they can replace them sometimes. And the only reason he still holds the rank of Bloodclaw is because his disrespectful attitude and pranks. And he's been a Space Marine for so long, he doesn't even really remember if he ever struggled with the killing urge the way the younger Bloodclaws do. And he's also convinced he never really bought into the idea of honors or sagas either. He views the Viking trappings of the Spacewolves chapter as a means to tame the wolves, a well-intentioned lie established by their Primarch Leman Russ. Lukas's novel actually starts off with two wolf lords in a fist fight, the loser of which is forced to accept Lukas into their great company, something that has become a tradition of the Hellwinter, where several of the great companies of the Spacewolves are stuck on their homeworld of Fenris, an unstable, feral world with long, harsh winters, and an ecosystem of megafauna that baffles the mind. The elk on this planet are the size of elephants. And as somebody who's lived in the mountains his whole life, never underestimate a deer or any of their cousins. Because if they can get the drop on you, they will murk you. Moose especially. Never turn your back on a moose. Anyway, let's get back on track. The loser of the fist fight between the Wolf Lords is Kjarl Grimblood, the Wolf Lord of the Grimblood Great Company. A man who can allegedly see premonitions of the future in the fire. But when I do that, everybody tells me to start taking my medication again and to stop burning things. He is not Lukas's biggest fan and often wonders why Ragnar Blackmane saved him in the first place, especially since Ragnar Blackmane was suspiciously absent in this fistfight, dodging responsibility for Lukas once again. Lukas goes to Grimblood's Bloodclaws and establishes himself as the dominant wolf, beating up the biggest and the most aggressive members of the Bloodclaws, and forming his own little quintet of followers. And since this is a Warhammer novel, you can assume that most of them don't live to the end of the book. But the group does really bond over the course of the story, and you get a good feel for all of their characters. Lukas takes his role as their pack leader very seriously. Even though he understands that their relationship is only temporary, he is hell-bent on teaching them ways beyond the surface-level Viking trappings of the chapter. He teaches them to think and hunt like real wolves, using ambush tactics to catch prey unaware, to fight dirty when they're overwhelmed, to win at all costs. And he does his best to keep the younger Bloodclaws out of danger when he can, often giving himself the most dangerous parts of their assignments, which at first is just hunting some of the megafauna on Fenris, which is basically just an excuse to do some pest control of the monsters attacking their bases constantly, and to keep the Bloodclaws' killing urge from getting so out of control they start killing each other. I know it's a contentious topic to bring up whether or not the Space Marines were going to be purged after the Great Crusade, but you would be pretty hard-pressed to convince me that the Space Wolves and the World Eaters definitely wouldn't have been. In a time of peace, those two chapters would have been a liability. But I digress. The antagonists of the novel are the Dark Eldar, led by a trickster in his own right and an outcast of Camera, Duke Sliscuss. Man, that name is hard to say. So instead I'm going to refer to him as the Snake of Camera, who, in my opinion, steals the show just as much as Lukas does whenever chapters focus on him. Some say he's the bastard son of Asdrubal Vect, others say he is the last of the royal line of the old Eldar Empire that weren't killed by Asdrubal Vect. Regardless, he is a well-established Corsair lord, who finds himself growing bored in his exile, although the idea of returning to Kamara seems even more boring to him, despite the fact that there is an active bounty on his head by Asdrubal Vecht, which Sliscuss insists is just for show, as the bounty is a way for Asdrubal Vecht to get rid of would-be upstarts or challengers to his own reign. To end his boredom, Sliscuss decides he's going to go on a hunt, and invite all of his quote-unquote friends to come along with him, partially as an excuse to get his enemies killed trying to hunt wild animals on foreign worlds, partially as an excuse to get rid of his rivals himself when they try to attack him on his own ship. Because there are no friends in Dark Eldar society, just rivals you haven't managed to poison or stick a knife in the back of yet. And Sliscuss knows this all too well. It's the reason why he almost exclusively hires Slith to be his bodyguard. The Serpent of Kamara is so powerful he even has a Dark Eldar homunculus under his employment, another exile of Kamara, who brings up the idea of where the hunt should take place because he wants to get a sample of rare genetics from it. And of course, he chooses Fenris. Since it's experiencing its Hellwinter right now, its communications are disrupted, so there's a good chance they could go there, hunt the monsters of the planet, and leave before the Spacewolves even know they're there. And it would be impossible for anyone on the planet to actually get a message off-world. And the novel does a very good job paralleling the Spacewolves and the Dark Eldar, as both factions live by the creed that only the strongest deserve to survive. The biggest difference being that the Spacewolves fight with a weapon in each hand, and the Dark Eldar fight with one hand down their pants. After a hilarious prank that I refuse to spoil in this video, Lukas and his protégés find themselves temporarily exiled from the rest of the Spacewolves, which makes this Lukas's 12th, 13th exile total, and I am severely lowballing that number. It is because they are outside the base from the rest of the Spacewolves that they actually come across the Dark Eldar, after first stumbling across a group of human survivors who were attacked by the Raiders. And while his protégés want to run off and fight the Dark Eldar alone, Lukas tells them they need to go back and let the rest of the Spacewolves know. While he understands that the Dark Eldar aren't sending in an invasion force, it's just a raid to take monsters back to the fighting pits of Kamara, maybe some of the human tribes as slaves, Lukas has a pretty big soft spot for the regular people of Fenris, openly questioning why the homeworlds of every other Space Marine chapters takes better care of their civilians than they do. Also, he might have a few bastard children running around. At the very least, it's heavily implied that one of the girls they run into, a warrior woman who survived the Dark Eldar raid, is a descendant of Lukas, like a great-granddaughter or something like that. Although the novel also seems to imply that Lukas might still have a functional sex drive, which is absurdly rare for non-Chaos Space Marines. Although they do refer to the Dark Angels as eunuchs, so maybe it's not as rare for the Spacewolves to still have functioning sex drives than I think it is. Also, Dark Angel slander is 100% allowed on this channel. They've had it too good for too long, just like Kevin. After delivering the corpses of the Eldar to the Wolf Lords as proof that the planet is being invaded, Lukas and Grimblood have a little bit of a heart-to-heart, where Grimblood confesses that he doesn't really hate Lukas, he just wishes he would apply himself more. You know, basically giving him the "I'm not mad, I'm disappointed" speech. But instead of a father to a son, it's a middle manager to the 45-year-old burnout who doesn't take his retail job seriously talk. And he tells Lukas that he saw in the fires that he was going to lose his heart to the Dark Eldar. And if you understand what happens to Lukas's heart, you're going to find that hilarious. Because Grimblood is absolutely certain that it is going to mean the death of Lukas during this raid. It is not. He is way too popular of a character to just get killed off like that. And again, really cementing these narrative parallels, the Harlequins, also fitting that whole trickster motif that's going on in this novel, tell Duke Sliscuss to take the heart of the wolf. And as the raid progresses, he finds that one particular band of Spacewolves is giving him far more trouble than any other. That, of course, being Lukas's Bloodclaws, who are using proper ambush tactics to fight the Dark Eldar raiders, using a small band of humans as bait to lure them in and kill the raiders, which Duke Sliscuss finds hilarious and actually forms a begrudging respect for Lukas. Although obviously, since he's an Eldar, he's puffed up and thinks he's better than him no matter what. And Lukas equally finds himself growing a begrudging respect for the Duke, as he notices that a lot of the Duke's enemies seem to be the ones falling into his traps. And he knows this because at one point he eats a Dark Eldar's brain, because as we often forget about Space Marines, they can eat your flesh and learn all of your memories temporarily. Which is creepy and cool and weird, and it's almost never used outside of something like this. Oh, and the rare genetics that the Duke's pet homunculus wanted to take were the Wolfen. And it's at this point we realize that the homunculus is really just a furry who wanted a big anthropomorphic wolfman to hold him at night because he keeps talking about how beautiful they are. There's a level of degeneracy I thought even the Dark Eldar wouldn't sink to, but here we are. After a series of events I will only describe as shenanigans, including a fight between Lukas's Bloodclaws and Dark Eldar Mandrakes, which are terrifying Eldar ghost assassin guys who can only be fought after being forced to manifest in the light via flashbang grenade. The Trickster and the Serpent of Kamara find themselves face to face, and the final duel of the novel begins. Now, the Duke is a talented swordsman in his own right. Earlier in the novel, he completely humiliates one of his rivals in a duel. Add on top of that Lukas has been fighting non-stop for days at this point, which is enough to tire out even a Space Marine. It's a pretty even fight that is leaning in the Duke's favor. And since both of them are notoriously dirty fighters, their final battle is both tense and somewhat hilarious, with the Duke ultimately being the victor, tearing out Lukas's secondary heart, but failing to finish off the Space Marine who somehow survives plummeting back down to his homeworld of Fenris from the Duke's flagship. The Duke decides he's going to keep the heart in a jar as a souvenir and go back to Kamara. And Lukas replaces his secondary heart with a stasis bomb as the ultimate troll move to whoever finally manages to finish him off. What's interesting about Lukas is the fact that the rune priests of the Spacewolves acknowledge the fact that his existence is necessary. To paraphrase what the rune priest Gale Runner says about him, he is the one who will speak truth when it is neither appropriate or welcome. And in a sense, it keeps the rest of the Space Wolves honest. And he is very much meant to represent Loki, the Norse god of mischief who actually tricked his way into the Pantheon in the first place. At least with the version I'm familiar with, he basically tricked Odin into becoming his blood brother. And aside from an incident where he shaved off Thor's wife's hair, he really never interacted with him in the old legends. He was always more of a foil for Heimdall and Odin than Thor. Lukas is basically exploring the concept of a loyal Loki. Meanwhile, Duke Sliscuss is the serpent, which was the animal often used to represent Loki. So in a way, the two opposing characters are like two sides of the same coin. The trickster outcasts of their respective factions, who both have and accept their roles in their respective factions as well. Because the Duke is one of the most powerful Dark Eldar in the setting, and yet he has no intention of ever challenging Vect for control of Kamara. He just doesn't care about ruling, he just likes to have fun. And usually his fun is at somebody else's expense through trickery or just outright theft. And Asdrubal Vect actually encourages his actions, because it keeps the rest of the Archons on their toes, or so focused on the Duke that they aren't trying to take down Vect. Meanwhile, Lukas's pranks are much less harmful to his fellow Spacewolves, but at the same time are sort of meant to be an ego check to them. Like in one particular instance where he put blood lice in the Terminator armor of one of the Wolf Lords, and almost got beat to death for it. It was Bjorn Stormwolf who almost beat him to death for that, and it was Ragnar Blackmane who intervened to save the Trickster's life. And one of Lukas's nicknames in the chapter is the Jackal Wolf, and it's supposed to be a reminder to the chapter of the dark time of their history, back before they were introduced to their Primarch, when they were basically feral, uncontrollable berserkers under the Emperor, and how Leman Russ was able to reel them in and tame them, at least as much as a wolf can be tamed. And with that, I'd like to thank Rob once again for suggesting this topic. The Lukas the Trickster novel was a blast to read, and I highly recommend it. And he seems like he'd be a pretty cool character to use on the tabletop, at least if he's still around in 10th edition. I actually have no idea. Nope, I just checked the wiki. He hasn't been playable since 8th edition. That's a real buzzkill. But it is what it is. Anyway, if you liked this video, go ahead and leave it a thumbs up or a comment. Maybe leave a clown emoji this time to let me know you watched it all the way to the end. If you too would like to leave me suggestions, you can always check out my Patreon. I only have a $1 tier and a $5 tier, so whatever. Anyway, you guys have a good one. See you later. Bye.